Hello, this is Greg Allison with Green Greg's coming to you on the 28th of January, 2021. Time on deck is 16:06 Central Daylight Time and no Central Standard Time. And I have with me special guest, Command Sergeant Major Michael Mabee. Now, some of you may recall I've had Command Sergeant Major Michael Mabee on this channel before. I consider him a good friend and a hero in this country because he's doing everything he can to help save this country in regards to having a secure power grid. And he's also wrote a really good book, which is very instructive on how to prepare your communities. We often talk about individual prepping, but you can't make it by yourself. This is a book that you really ought to consider and buy, and there'll be links from his website, which I'll put in the channel notes here, for how to get to this book and his website also. And as you may recall also, I mentioned I have ran 2 power grid defense conferences here, and Command Sergeant Michael Mabee was one of our stellar presenters at my last Power Grid Defense Conference here in Huntsville. So, and what we're talking about today is we're talking about this, among other things, this executive order that was issued by President Biden on the 20th, the day he got inaugurated, actually, which was Executive Order 13990, which suspended securing the bulk power grid Executive Order 13920, which had been signed on 1 May of 2020 by President Trump. Now, he's got some, Command Sergeant Mike maybe has some perspective on this, like maybe it was slipped under the crack because it surely didn't seem to fit the executive order that was put into. So, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Command Sergeant Major Michael Mabee.
Mike, Greg, thank you. Thank you very much for having me, Greg. It's always a pleasure to be on your channel and talk to all of your viewers about things that are going on with securing the grid. So on January 20th, I mean, as expected, every time a new president comes in, one of the first things that they do is they sign a bunch of executive orders because every president has their own agenda, as well, they should. So one of the executive orders that President Biden signed, oddly enough, was called Executive Order on Protecting Public Health and the Environment and Restoring Science to Tackle the Climate Crisis. So that was the title of the executive order. And it's about 7 pages long. It covers a whole myriad of different things, but there's one little paragraph in there where it suspended Executive Order 13920, which was securing the United States bulk power system. And that executive order had to do with supply chain cybersecurity. So specifically, that executive order targeted adversaries of the United States providing equipment for our electric grid. So that seems to make a lot of sense, doesn't it? You don't want to put equipment on the electric grid that are manufactured by, say, Russia or China that might have stuff in there that doesn't belong. So, is this a problem? So, President Trump put out Executive Order 13920. Well, why did he do that? Well, we had several incidents, and the most recent of which everybody's heard of, the SolarWinds hack. And in the SolarWinds hack, that's a supply chain cybersecurity hack, which impacted both federal government agencies and private sector entities. Now, when we're talking about the electric grid, remember, the electric grid is not just one thing controlled by one person or one company or controlled by the government. It's not. There are about 3,000 different companies and entities involved in the US electric grid. And so that's 3,000 barn doors. It's not like we have one barn door to grab. So you got 3,000 companies out there that have a piece of the electric grid, a responsibility for part of our critical infrastructure. Largely, these are private sector companies. There are some government entities such as Tennessee Valley Authority, Bonneville Power. There's some federal entities involved, some state municipal entities, but largely we're talking about private sector entities, PG&E, Duke Energy, National Grid, all of these big electric companies and all of these small electric companies. So these companies have to buy equipment for the grid from somewhere. Now, China is happy to provide us with transformers. We don't make transformers in the United States anymore. In the past, we bought them from Germany and South Korea. Transformers are huge pieces of equipment that in normal times to replace one of these electric transformers. And for those of you who aren't really familiar with the terminology, when you're driving down the street and you see that big chain link fence and those big gray boxes and all the wires coming into them, those are transformers. And those transformers are critical to the electric grid. There are about 10,000 extra high voltage transformers in the country, and there's tens of thousands of smaller ones. But these transformers in normal times take about 18 months, a year to 18 months to produce just one of them. So if you need to replace a transformer, it takes you a long time to do it. The danger is if we lose a lot of these transformers all at once, either due to a cyber attack or an EMP or a coordinated physical attack, it could take down the grid in large swaths of the country for a long period of time. We're talking about possibly months or longer. And the human factor of something like that happening is totally catastrophic. So this executive order that was put into place almost a year ago now, on May 1st of 2020, was supposed to help protect the electric grid from threats in the supply chain. And one of the threats, we've seen solar winds, but also a lot of people don't know this, but the federal government seized a transformer that came from China. It was bound to the electric grid that supplies Denver. And the federal government seized it and brought it out to Sandia National Laboratories to evaluate it. Now, the federal government generally does not seize a transformer and bring it to a national laboratory. So clearly they thought there was something amiss with it. One of Greg and my colleagues, Joe Weiss, who's a cybersecurity expert, believes that this happened because there were things in this transformer that the Chinese put in there that did not belong, like back doors. So if you can imagine in your supply chain, if you put equipment onto your electric grid that some adversary like China or Russia can turn off because there's some type of a back door to it, that would be a national security issue, wouldn't it? So,
absolutely. One of our worst concerns is that they could switch these things in such a way as to cause overload on other ones and cause them to actually physically burn out. And,
yes.
And if you can burn out the right ones, you can do cascading failure problems and cause a lot of them to burn out. It's been determined by some analysts that you could take down the entire national grid if you took down the right 9 substations. And these,
yes, that was actually determined by the federal government.
Right. So the other thing that a lot of people aren't aware of is that these are targeted. They're targeted by hackers. The Iranians had stated the head of the Revolutionary Guard in Iran was told this data. It was given to him, and his reply was, I've already got 20 targeted. So with sleeper cells here in the United States. And we've seen what a sleeper cell might do with what looks like a dry run against the transformer out there at the Metcalf station near San Jose back in 16 April 2013, where somebody did a dry run exercise which happened to be coincident with the same day that the North Korean satellite first flew over Washington, D.C. And coincidentally, about the same period, we had the Chung Chung gang probably running around the Gulf of Mexico or the Caribbean Sea with missile launchers and erected inside their launch container, or built inside their launch containers, just ready to erect. They were, when it went through Panama Canal, hidden under sugar.
Yeah.
So these are existent threats. They're real.
Yeah, they are. They're not hypothetical threats. So the cyber threat, solar winds actually happened. That was an actual attack that impacted both federal government agencies, private sector entities, including entities in our electric grid. The other thing, Greg, you mentioned the Metcalf attack, that physical attack. A lot of people don't know this, but in the last decade, there have been 706 physical attacks against the electric grid. And by physical attacks, I'm talking about 706 intentional attacks to cause damage to equipment in the grid. And they vary everything from like this big coordinated attack against Metcalf, all the way down to, possibly a couple of drunk people breaking in and doing some vandalism. But nonetheless, it's very, very clear that our electric grid is very vulnerable to physical attacks. And if we think about what happened in 9/11 and the level of sophistication the terrorists had in order to hijack several airplanes and run them into buildings simultaneously, the level of sophistication it would take to do a coordinated attack against several transformers is much less. And so not only do we have to, worry about foreign terrorists, but, we've got to worry about US terrorists. We have to worry about any type of coordinated physical attack. We have to worry about cyber. We have to worry about the sun. We've got to worry about a geomagnetic disturbance or solar flare, which is certainly going to happen at some point. The last moderately decent sized one to really hit and impact us was the 1989 Quebec blackout, which was caused by a solar flare. But actually, the last big one to hit us has been over 100 years ago, the Carrington Event in 1849. If that happened today, that would wipe out our transformers, which are not protected, from that type of event. So we've got a ton of threats.
That was 162 years ago, roughly.
Yes.
So what's interesting is actually 100 years ago, in 1921, there was another solar event, which wasn't as strong as the Carrington event. It was maybe a tenth as strong. We call it the railroad event. If that one happened today, it's thought that one would take out our power grid. And our Earth's magnetic field is dropping in field strength very rapidly right now. It might be a Quebec event could do the job now too. So, and the NASA estimate that was put on the probability of a Carrington type event, the bigger one, is on the order of 12 to 14% per decade. So that's really extremely high, unacceptably high for us not to be doing anything. So here's what bothers me, Mike. I am electrical engineer, and I've been working for 2 decades in avionics system safety. So I look at things for how they fail. I look at you weigh 2 things. You weigh the consequences and you weigh the likelihood. And when you're looking at these things, you look at the number of root causes that can cause this thing to happen. This is how I do hazard analysis. I look what can fail, how can it fail, what's the root causes, and what's the likelihood, and then you try to control the root causes. Well, we've got a huge thing here that has the consequences are off the chart. It's destruction of our whole nation. The root causes are way too many, and nothing has really been mitigated, which to me just seems obscene. It seems criminal. So, especially when you got things like the sun, which we don't do anything else, the sun's going to take it down. That's just that to me that blows my mind. We've had the EMP Congressional Task Force that Dr. Pry was on tell us that here's a book that he wrote.
Yep.
Of course, this is Mabee's book again. Do check them out. But that task force said that within a year, that 9 out of 10 people would be gone in this country. 9 out of 10, at least 90% within a year if our whole power grid went down. And loss of the whole power grid is if you have a solar event or an EMP or wide enough attacks of the other types is absolutely on the table possible.
Yep.
And people have said, oh, we'll just replace its transformers. Well, think, it will take you a year to 9 months to start getting these things on the loading dock. But if you lose, like you said, you got 10,000 of them. If you use a lot of them, that's way beyond the manufacturing surge capacity of all the other factories. Plus, how are they going to operate if they've lost their grids? How are we going to get the stuff? How are we going to order it? How are we going to receive it? How are we going to install it if we don't have the power to run our computers and internet through which we do acquisitions? If we don't have the banks to back us, if 9 out of 10 people are gone by the time it gets here, but then you've lost your whole society, the fabric of society has unraveled. So how do you even start putting this Humpty Dumpty back together again? Mike, I don't see it. This is like me, the end of the nation.
Well,
the world.
And probably the question, your viewers are wondering to themselves right now is, well, if we know about all these threats, why isn't anything getting done? That's the first question whenever I do a presentation. People, I outline what the threats are, and people are like, well, why don't they do something about it? Whoever they are. So let's talk about, yeah, let's talk about who they are, because there are there's several theys. When you say, why don't they do something about it? You could be talking about they, the companies in the electric utility industry. You could be talking about they, the regulators like Department of Energy and FERC, or you could be talking about they being Congress, who could enact legislation to protect the grid. So
there's one more they we need to talk about when we finish up here, and that's us.
Okay. Yes, that is us.
There ain't no they is us. We is they.
Exactly. And that fourth they that you just mentioned, us, is where the solutions got to come from. So
bingo.
Let's talk about they being Congress. So why can't Congress enact legislation to protect the grid? Well, they could. They actually could. They have the power to enact a law that would protect the grid against these threats. Like every threat we've talked about, the physical threat, geomagnetic disturbance, EMP, cyber, all of these things, we could protect the grid. Some of them might be hard, but it could be done. So why hasn't Congress done it? Well, I will give you 1.2 million reasons why Congress has not protected the grid. And you may suspect this has to do with money, and it does. In the last 10 years, the electric utility industry has spent $1.2 billion, with a B, billion dollars, lobbying Congress. And this is just on the federal level. This isn't the state public utility commissions. This isn't, the states. This is just federal Congress. They've spent $1.2 billion lobbying Congress. And largely, whenever Congress does introduce legislation which might protect the grid, such as the Grid Act or the SHIELD Act, they lobby against it because the electric utilities, their lobbyists, don't want the government regulating their business. And I understand that. I mean, that's, there's always a little bit of a, too much regulation versus not enough regulation pendulum that goes back and forth, and, et cetera, et cetera. But when you're talking about our critical infrastructure, when you're talking about something that every single person in the United States, 330 million people depend on, we need to regulate that. We need to protect that. That is, something that we cannot live without. And Congress has been on the take, basically. This is all legal. These companies are allowed to spend all this money lobbying Congress and have their voice heard. Unfortunately, the voice that's not being heard is the 330 million people in America who depend on this for their very lives. Now, the other piece of it is, in addition to the $1.2 billion in lobbying money, over the past 10 years, there have been $149.5 million in political contributions by the electric utility industry, mostly to members of the key committees that are in charge of this legislation that would protect the grid. So you're a politician in Washington, and you're getting thousands, tens of thousands of dollars in political contributions from the electric utility industry. That makes it very difficult for you to support legislation that they are against. That is just the fact of politics and the way things are, that the electric utility industry has spent billions of dollars keeping regulation at bay. So that's why Congress hasn't been able to pass legislation to protect the grid. Now, the regulators, the main regulator for the electric grid is a entity called the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Most people have never heard of it. It's a very small federal agency. It wasn't designed to be an agency to protect the grid, but what ended up happening is, if you think of the electric grid didn't just happen. The electric grid has been built over generations. So if you talk to people who were alive back in the Great Depression, a lot of people didn't even have electricity back in those days, and they didn't have indoor plumbing and all the stuff that we take for granted today. But over the generations, the electric grid has been built piece by piece, and it's presently the largest machine in the history of mankind. It's a masterpiece of technological achievement. However, it's been patched together over the generations, piece by piece, and it's very, very vulnerable. There's a lot of old equipment. There were reports during the big California wildfires about equipment that was over 100 years old that PG&E owned that was causing some of these fires. So, a lot of the electric grid has very old equipment on it. And some of the newer equipment that is getting put on it may possibly be coming from places that we wouldn't necessarily think are secure, i.e. China. Interestingly, about a year ago, there was a hearing in Congress, and Senator Angus King from Maine, he's an independent from Maine, asked the electric grid regulator, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, which is a private corporation that regulates the electric grid, asked whether any of the companies in the electric grid had Kaspersky, ZTE, or Huawei equipment or software in the grid, and they couldn't answer the question. This was a year ago. So as a result of these real kind of catastrophic failures of our supply chain cybersecurity, an executive order was put out last year, but then all of a sudden, January 20th of this year, the executive order was suspended for 90 days, which is of great concern. Why would that happen? So I don't know. I wasn't actually in the room when the president was putting together and his staff was putting together the executive order. What I suspect is that the electric utility industry influenced that one paragraph that went into the executive order. They saw their opportunity and they tried to kind of put this in under global warming.
Yeah, that was interesting, Mike, because there was another executive order specifically about canceling executive orders, and it didn't go in there. It went in this other one, which actually started out, the title was, public health and things like that. So, and environment, and then global warming kind of stuff. So, it really snuck it in.
Yeah, and I think they did sneak it in, and I think the reason for it is, the United States is one of the biggest producers of greenhouse gases, in the world, but who's even a bigger producer of greenhouse gases than us? China. So, one thing that, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist by any stretch of the imagination. I actually spend a good deal of time trying to debunk conspiracy theories. But, one thing is, if you wanted to do some horse trading, and this executive order clearly labeled, China, the one, from May of last year, clearly labeled China as an adversary of the United States. Well, if you want to try to get China on board with reducing their greenhouse gases, one way you could possibly do it is, pull an executive order or suspend an executive order that might have irritated them. I don't know whether that was the reason, but if that was, I don't think it's a good trade. I think our security.
I fail to see how this would irritate them because it puts them back on the shopping list.
Oh yeah, no. I mean the one that this suspended irritated them. Yes. So I don't know why this ended up in there, but actually there is some good news that just happened yesterday that we were discussing before this, and this issue of the suspended executive order did come up yesterday in the confirmation hearings for the potential new Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm. So this might not be a bad time, Greg. Maybe we can take a look at that clip and then we can talk about it.
I'm pulling it up right now, so you should be able to see it on your screen. And I believe this is the video. You may play this video now.
That is it. Yep.
All right, we'll go into it. We'll hear what she
Mr. Chairman, if I may, there has not been a question yet raised before the governor here with regards to cybersecurity. And of course, we all know the recent news about solar winds and the hack there. It's really highlighted the need for increased coordination throughout the executive branch. I personally think that the move by the Biden administration to revoke the executive order on the bulk power system was unwise. I think it puts our electric grid at greater risk for cyber attacks. I'm concerned about that. I think this entire committee is concerned about where we are with the reliability and the resilience of the grid when it comes to cyber. And so I'm well over my time, but I would ask for your indulgence if Governor Granholm can respond to the question about grid resilience and security there, because I think it's so important.
It's very important. And briefly, I mean, we have 5 million miles of distribution wires, 200,000 miles of high voltage electric wires. I haven't been fully briefed on the the national security and the confidential aspects of the solar wind cyber hack, but clearly that's one example, and we're getting hacked all the time and attacked all the time. We will have inside of the DOE a person at a very high level that is responsible for making sure that the response to this is coordinated. We have to harden our electric grid for protection of our energy.
So you might want to tell her about who she is before I play this any further. She is.
Yep. So Jennifer Granholm is the former Michigan governor, and she's been nominated by the Biden administration to be the new Secretary of Energy. And that the Secretary of Energy is a critical position when it comes to protecting all of our energy infrastructure, but particularly the electric grid.
Well, she made the right statement here, so let's go on.
System. I hope that this is a part of the infrastructure package that will be coming from the administration as well, and I look forward to working with you on it.
I think DOE's very specific and very important role as being the sector specific within energy when it comes to cyber is very important. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, so let's break this down a little bit. A couple of the things that were said that are very important, but it's also kind of nuanced. So not everybody might have caught it. So at the end, you heard Senator Murkowski talk about how DOE, Department of Energy, is very important because they're the sector-specific agency. So what does that mean? So Presidential Policy Directive 21, which came out years ago during the Obama administration, identifies 16 critical infrastructures in the United States. And these 16 critical infrastructures are infrastructures that are so critical to this country that if something happened to them, it would have an adverse impact either to the economy or to the health and safety of the United States citizens.
So
now,
Mike, here's something that ought to be considered. How many of those 15, how many of those require electrical power to operate?
All 16 of them. So that's why the energy sector is considered to be the enabling critical infrastructure for all the others. In other words, it is the most important. If you lose the electrical infrastructure, you lose transportation, you lose food, you lose communications, you lose the chemical industry, you lose medical, you lose the financial infrastructure, you lose every other critical infrastructure if you lose energy. And so the Department of Energy is the sector-specific agency in the government that's in charge of the energy sector. So when Senator Murkowski's talking about DOE being the sector-specific agency, that's what she meant. Now, Governor Granholm, let's look at what she said. She said, we've got 5 million miles of distribution lines, and I want to talk about distribution in a second. We've got 200,000 miles of high voltage electric lines, and she came out and said, we have to harden our electric grid for the protection of our energy system. So in her confirmation hearing, Governor Granholm has said we have to harden our electric grid. There it is. This is, sworn testimony before Congress, and we need to hold the Department of Energy and Secretary Granholm, when she gets confirmed, accountable to protect our electric grid. Now, when we're talking about the electric grid, remember there are three main components to it. You've got generation of electricity, and that can be nuclear power plants, it could be fossil fuel plants, it could be solar, it could be wind. So you've got the generation of electricity. Then you've got the transmission of electricity, which are those big, long transmission lines that you see, running, across the country that move electricity from one place to another. Then you've got the distribution system, the distribution of electricity, which is where we get the electricity from the street to our houses or to our businesses. So those three elements of, the energy system, we kind of refer to the whole thing as the electric grid. The federal government only really regulates the bulk power system, which is the transmission part of it. The state public utility commissions usually regulate the distribution part of it, and a myriad of different agencies might regulate the generation end of it. So for example, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission regulates the nuclear plants, and states may regulate other types of generation plants or generation facilities. So there isn't one regulator for the electric grid. There's actually over 60 different regulators, and these 60 different regulators don't talk. They sometimes have competing goals. So the state public utility commissions, a lot of times the main thing they're focused on is the rates, the electric rates, that are being charged. FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, they're only responsible for the bulk power system, which is the transmission system.
I want to explain the relation between NERC and FERC.
Oh, yeah.
I have done in the past, but we may have some new listeners here.
Yeah. And that's very important too, because it's mind-numbingly complex. So it used to be that nobody really regulated the interstate transmission of electricity. And then we had the Great Northeast Blackout of 2003. And as a result of that, there was a change in the regulatory scheme. So the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission became responsible for approving mandatory standards for the bulk power system, for that part of the electric grid. Now, the way this was done, the electric utility industry did not want to be regulated, and they lobbied very hard, and they knew that it had to happen after the Great Northeast Blackout. I mean, there was just no way it wasn't going to happen. So what they got put into place, they lobbied very hard. And rather than the federal government regulating it directly, they created what's known as an ERO, or Electric Reliability Organization. And that presently is the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, which is it's not a government agency. It's a private nonprofit corporation, and they get their money from the companies of the electric grid, pay an assessment in. So they're funded by the companies of the electric grid. And the standards, these mandatory standards that now the government has to approve, are written by the companies in the electric grid. So great work when you can get it. The electric grid writes its own standards, which then the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, which is funded by the electric grid, presents to the federal government to approve. That's the way this system works with the bulk power system. So the regulatory scheme.
The Fox is in charge of the hen house.
The Fox is not only in charge of the hen house, the Fox has the key. The Fox is in charge of every aspect of the hens. So, and this hasn't been working. It absolutely has not been working. And the evidence of that is the fact that on the physical security side, there have been over 700 attacks against the electric grid since mandatory standards came into place. Just a couple months ago, we find out about the SolarWinds hack, and a year prior to that, NERC couldn't even say whether there was a supply chain cybersecurity problem. So the system is not working. The mandatory standards are not stringent enough, and our grid is not protected.
So this is one of the things you focused on, Mike, for the viewers.
Yes.
Mike has been for the last over a year really drilling in and putting out these filing freedom of information requests from the government to get all the instances of things that they've been sweeping under the rug, so that we can get some transparency into these data items that he's just brought to our attention, of the number of incidents of things that's happening with our grid. They've been trying to cover that up, and you've also sued the federal government to get about this. So tell us about all that, Mike.
Sure. Yep. So because the electric utilities are the ones that basically put this system into place and all the rules into place, everything like that, what they wrote in is that the public does not have the right to know what companies violate mandatory standards. So, mandatory critical infrastructure protection standards. So if the, either FERC or NERC finds that a company violated a critical infrastructure protection standard, you do not have the right to know what the name of the company is and what they violated. And if you don't have the right to know if they're a repeat violator, you don't have the right to know, what action was taken, to mitigate the violation. So none of this information is available to the public. So I've been filing.
Our lives may depend on this.
Correct. Yeah, and I'll give you a real good example is there's been a lot of criticism about PG&E out in California. They've caused fires that have killed scores of people. The Camp Fire, I believe, killed over 80 people, which was caused by a PG&E line. And guess what? There is a mandatory standard for vegetation management. So in other words, there's a mandatory standard that they're supposed to keep that from happening, and yet the system didn't work and people died. Now, we don't have the right to know whether PG&E is violating critical infrastructure protection standards according to this system. So I've been filing Freedom of Information Act requests. And since the government is denied, I'm now suing the government to divulge to the public the names of the violators of standards. So out of all these companies that are out there that run the grid, if there's a repeat violator or there's somebody that just is not taking care of their part of our national security, the public does have a right to know that. The public needs to know whether this regulatory regime is working or not. And if it's not working, we need that information. So
I lost you there. All right, Mike's frozen, so maybe he'll come back in a minute. But this is
the lawsuit has been pending now for it's probably going to be going on for a while longer.
Yeah, you dropped out there for a minute, Mike.
Okay, am I back?
Yeah, you're back now, but you might want to repeat the last paragraph or so you said, because you just dropped out.
Okay, yeah. So the lawsuit was filed over a year ago now, and it's like lawsuits, they're kind of slow. But I'm suing the federal government to divulge the names of these violators so the public can see whether this system is working or not. In my research, it's not working. I've put a lot of evidence up on my website about why this regulatory system is not working. And the only way we're going to be able to get it to work is by shining some sunlight on it so the people can look at it and say, this isn't working. Something else has to be done. So that's kind of the purpose of the lawsuit. Basically, for a citizen to have to file a lawsuit against the government to protect the grid, I think is horrible. But luckily, we live in the United States of America, and I can do that. And so far, I haven't been sent to a gulag. So, we do have enough freedom that, that I was able to do that. So I do. Yeah, yeah.
so far.
I am, am glad that I'm still here. Now, I'll tell you, the entire electric utility industry has been fighting me on this.
Oh, yeah.
They have been fighting these Freedom of Information Act requests. So it is a David versus Goliath, but I'm still chucking as many, small round stones as I can.
Very good. Very good. So this is why you're one of my top heroes in the world. I mean, you're way out there beyond Superman. I mean, you're real and you're doing real stuff, and it can save millions of lives if we prevail here. So, guys, Command Sergeant Major Mabee, he's a bona fide hero. Not to mention he actually saved someone's life in 9/11 in the Twin Towers. So, and oddly enough, he credits that guy with saving his life. So that's the kind of guy Mabee is. I've got just tons of appreciation for this individual that we are blessed to have in our interview here today. So what I might do is show your site. So you've got a lot of good information and content on there, and I'll have a link to it. So we'll go back to it here in a second. This is the landing page. If you just go straight on this site to the home page, and I'm going to minimize this little picture of us here so we can see this a little better. This is his latest news on here. And of course, he's got the Murkowski question here. He's got his article here about the suspension of the order to protect our bulk power system. And this is like an interesting article here. 1 billion reasons why we do not have grid security. Money talks, grid security walks. I mean, this is exactly what he's telling us about. And you can come down through here, and he's got a really good explanation for what's electric grid, the regulatory environment that we have to face, who funds and controls NERC. So we got that unholy alliance between NERC and FERC, which is totally backwards. And I did a video some long time back about how the federal government is actually run. And in the normal situations, you have a very incestuous relationship between the regulatee and the regulator. But here, it is way beyond. Now here's something you might want to look at right here, guys. It's according to the Center for Responsive Politics, the electric utilities as of 2020. This is how much they spent on lobbying, guys. Almost $82 million. Now, Mike is doing this out of the goodness of his own heart and pocket. So, this is what our David, Mike, and our community, we have a grid defense community and we meet regularly through a couple of venues, one of them being Secure the Grid teleconference. But this is what we're up against, guys. But we're literally David's, and Command Sergeant Major Mabee is the tip of the spear. He and a few other individuals, which I've been fortunate to have some of these on my channel before and get some more back. Like, you may remember seeing Dr. Pry and we've seen General Krasniak, and we've had others on this channel too on this topic. So what would you like to point to in here, Mike? What would you like for me to go to show people? Well, we've also got, get this, it's got a library here, a grid security library. There's all kind of good stuff here. A civil defense library here. And this is what I like. And he's got some stuff about himself, his book. So you can get his book. I hope I'm on your friends list.
Yeah.
He's got a Fund the Fight. You can help him out. That would definitely help. So take action, though, guys. This is what we're really all about, is taking action. And some of you might remember I actually used this photograph in a couple of my videos where I've had Mike on in the past. So these are things that you can do. And I'm also going to put links in the channel show notes and in the pin notes to this video that tell you how to contact the Senate, the House, and put the Capitol switchboard on there and things like that. So this is an excellent information resource. This is Tommy Waller, a friend of ours who also runs the Secure the Grid teleconference that we attend on a weekly basis, and that's about the Secure the Grid Coalition that Mike and I are members of. Peter's also got a committee that I'm a member of, state rep for Alabama, Dr. Peter Pry. So
Yeah, you might want to, Greg, you might want to point out the grid security library, the government documents, because this actually for those people who want to look further into the problem, if you go under library, grid security library, and government documents, this is the largest collection of federal government documents on grid security on the internet. That, you know, we haven't seen anything bigger than this. There are just troves and troves of documents, and it starts. I mean, some of the first documents in the federal government go all the way back to the 1960s, like in 1962, where they're talking about the starfish prime, where they first observed the EMP, the EMP phenomena. But the federal government has known for decades about threats to the electric grid. And these are, the documents that basically prove that, that prove that federal government has known about all these threats. And yet here we are today talking about the 90-day suspension of a supply chain cybersecurity order.
Wow.
It's
59
crazy.
years ago. Wow, 59 years ago here.
Yep.
That's
And
for some of our people were born. You might not have even been born then.
I sure wasn't.
I was. I was a baby. I was 2-year-old.
Yep. But if for those people who like to do their own research before they believe something, and I applaud you, because I'm the same way. I don't just believe things people say. I need to see the proof. If you want to see the proof, go to this library of federal documents about grid security.
Wow.
And in there, you are going to find that the federal government has known about these threats. There have been hearings. There have been federal government reports. This has been well documented by our own government for decades. And yet here we are today with a vulnerable electric grid.
Yeah, and the EMP Commission that said 9 out of 10 people will be gone in a year, that came out, what, a dozen years ago?
Yeah, that their first report came out in 2004 and their second one in 2008. And then their most recent reports came out 2 years ago, July 2 years ago. So
and I also know that Dr. Graham, who had once been an acting administrator for NASA, was a Soviet weapons expert and testified. Let me go back to stop the share here. He testified, and it was entered in Congressional record in 2008. We thought it was classified. We actually found the Congressional record. So now we know it's not, because it was published. But he actually testified to Congress and told Congress that when the wall fell in the Soviet Union, that he had been, and the Soviet Union broke up, he had been in contact with several ex-Soviet generals. They were more open at that point, because they thought we were going to come in and help them out. We were suddenly going to be new friends, but we'd turn them into adversaries right off the bat, which was, I think, a very tactical, big blunder. But they told him that they had EMP super weapons, which were capable of putting 200,000 volts per meter on our power lines. And that's guys, that's 4 times higher than the standard that we built to protect to. Our standard only costs for 50,000. And furthermore, they even said, hey, we gave this technology in North Korea. And what a lot of people think, they think this is super powerful bombs, but it's actually the smaller devices that's most deadly, because the shielding required for the larger devices inhibit the flow of gamma rays, and the gamma rays are what knocks the electrons off the atoms in our atmosphere that causes that big cascading rush of that big electrical field to be generated and push out through our atmosphere into all our power systems. So
yeah, and in addition to the Russians and the Chinese and the North Koreans, also the Iranians, and there's some who believe that Iran already has a bomb. There's some that believe that Iran doesn't. But what we do know for sure is that Iran knows about EMP. They've practiced firing missiles off of container ships in the Caspian Sea, and exploding them in the air. Now, why would you do that? Well, you would do that if you wanted to, set off an EMP. So in addition to state actors such as, Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, the other thing we have to worry about is terrorists. Well, terrorists really couldn't do a nuclear weapon. Okay, well, if you believe that, you also need to understand that there are at least 60 unaccounted for nuclear weapons running around somewhere. Now, most of them are from either Soviet or American planes or ships that went down. But nonetheless, there are 60, at least that we know about from unclassified sources. There may be more that we don't know about because it's classified, but from unclassified sources, we know of at least 60 nuclear weapons that are gone, that have disappeared. If a terrorist organization got a hold of a nuclear weapon, then all of a sudden you have to worry about, a terrorist threat of, an EMP or a dirty bomb or, anything like that. But, as we said before, and one thing that I just recently found, which was very disturbing, let me just see what
I
the date of.
myself ran a program 20 years ago on a shoestring budget where we went out in the Gulf of Mexico, 200 miles out, and launched a rocket from a utility boat. And I've done this a few times. I've done it more than once, but I've been launching rockets from utility boats on shoestring budgets. And we, with a small crew of guys, figured out how to defeat the COCOM limits that were intended to keep rogue nations and terrorist groups and other countries just from using our GPS against us to guide weapons in on us. So we did really two things on a shoestring budget. We defeated that. Plus, we had a rocket launched from a altitude balloon out over the sea, which would be the perfect way to put a sneak attack on the United States. You're talking about those Caspian Sea exercises. We know about the Chong Chong gang, and I'm really worried about Venezuela because it's an unstable nation, and they have no control down there. We know that it has a lot of players that are somewhat less than our best friends in this world, like Iran and China and Russia and North Korea are all dealing with Venezuela. So if any of these countries just went off the shore of Venezuelan states to launch like that, we wouldn't know who did it.
Yeah, and there was recently a report that it ended up being from a leaked Department of Justice search warrant where a neo-Nazi group was under investigation by the Department of Justice for planning a coordinated physical attack against the electric grid. So, and these are, we're not talking about terrorists from another country. We're talking about terrorists from the United States. And so this report came out just a couple of months ago. It wasn't supposed to get out. The search warrant ended up getting leaked to the press, and then it got reported, and then but it's very disturbing. And what is most disturbing, and Greg, I hope you don't mind if I irritate all of your listeners right now at their federal government, but so this just happened where we just heard about this possibility of a coordinated physical attack in the planning stages by a terrorist organization. Let me go back to 1981, 1981 report by the Government Accountability Office, which now used to be the Government Accounting Office, but the General Accounting Office. Now it's the Government Accountability Office, GAO. In 1981, they put out a report that said federal electrical emergency preparedness is inadequate. And let me just read one paragraph from this. If saboteurs, terrorists, or an enemy attack the nation's electric power system, would the federal government be prepared to handle the resulting energy disruptions? Probably not, because the Department of Energy has failed to prepare the required electric emergency preparedness plans, on and on and on. This is from 1981.
And it's still true.
And
that was 40 years ago. I was at Fort Greely, Alaska in Murkowski State, where she's from back then.
Yep.
She wrote that report.
And May of 1981, I was in basic training.
I was stationed in the Coal Regions Test Center at Fort Greely, Alaska. I went there one May, actually. 1 April of 1981 is when I got assigned there. But a little better than 2 years, or 2 years and a month.
Yep. So in 1981, the federal government was talking about physical attacks against the electric grid being a threat, and yet we've had over 700 physical attacks against the electric grid in the last 10 years. So here we are today with a government that has still failed to protect the electric grid. We've got electric utility industry that has failed to protect the grid. So what can we do? Well, a couple of things that people can do, and I would highly encourage you. I mean, if what you're hearing disturbs you, you really do need to take some action, because the fourth they that we were talking about is us. And that's where the solution is going to come from.
They
You
is
need
us, we is they.
Yep.
Because we can't
Exactly.
rely on these others. We've already got this track record of 40 plus years that they're sitting on their hands, and they just don't know what to do because they're so imbued with the money. Well, these elected officials in the end have to answer to the electors, because they may use money to campaign, but in the end, the public opinion is what keeps them in office. And if enough people find out about this and start beating them, they're going to have to listen. That's why I'm trying to reach out to the grassroots. That's why I reach out to people on my channel, because I've had experience through the National Space Society when I was chairman of the executive committee, chairman of the policy committee for 10 years. I actually got a lot of things done in Washington, D.C., with a small group of people. And I know we can do the same. We should be able to marshal more people than that to beat on these guys. And so that's why I'm going to put in the show notes the links for you to contact your Senate. And you have 2 senators in every state, and each one of you have a congressman, a representative.
Yep.
And you can contact them. And Command Sergeant Michael Mabee has he's got a whole big page of actions that you can go into and take. You can also find, I had now it's outdated now, but I've got a website, powergriddefense.org. I need to update that. I'll do that eventually, but it's also got links to groups and things in there. So we're out here trying to make a difference, but it really relies on you. They is us and we is they. So in the end, a lot of people, accuse me, Greg, you're always out here doing fear porn. No, I do fix it porn.
Yeah.
Let's get her fixed, get her done. That's what this is all about, because I'm a prepper, but there's some things you just can't prep adequately from. And I just did a video about what could happen with our nuclear power plants going up, not the power plants, but just the spent fuel rush. See, people don't think about that. They're always focused on the power plants. I said, okay, let's ignore the power plants. Let's think about these spent fuel rod pools. It's not a pretty picture, my friends. How do you survive that? Anywhere. I mean, it's doable, but it will be not a pretty picture, not a pretty picture. And that's why I told Dr. Pry, and I've done it on a video with him. We talked about it privately too, that the Emp Commission estimate that 9 out of 10 people would be gone in a year was very optimistic. I think it'd be a lot more and a lot sooner. You're going to lose most of it in just a matter of 3 months, 2 or 3 months.
Yeah, and when you think about it, I mean, a lot of people will sit there and say, well, that's crazy. How could that possibly be? Well, when you really think about where the United States was before the electric grid, and back when we had 50 million people, and back when almost everybody was involved in agriculture. We were an agricultural society, and we produced our own food. If you didn't go out and split some wood, you wouldn't survive the winter. We've lost all of these skills. So because the electric grid has enabled us to lose these skills, because we no longer have to go out and chop wood. You can just turn up the thermostat. You no longer have to dig a well or, go get water. You just turn on the tap. All of these survival things that we used to have to do as a society to be able to survive have been taken off the table and replaced, by the conveniences that the electric grid has brought to modern society. But with that comes risk. And the risk is, if somebody unplugs us, we do not have the skills or the resources to survive with, 330 million people in the United States.
So a lot of people, will leave notes in my videos and say, well, I hope the grid does go down because we're too dependent on these phones, or they give a lot of reasons. Or they say, well, I'm covered. I've got, I got beans and whatever else, I've got everything I need, or I'm live off grid. I'm umpteen up miles from anything and I'm good. But what they don't realize is, no, well, one, you're going to have starving hordes of pouring out of the city, scaring across the countryside, looking for you and that stuff you got. And 2, that's why you need the community defense that you're talking about in your civil defense book. Mm-hmm. I've also started a tribe effort So if anybody wants to get involved in my tribe effort or petition for freedom in this country, you can email my group at info@freedomrestorationfoundation.org. And that's a group I've started, an organization, my Freedom Restoration Foundation. And we do have right now our website's not up yet. We're building it, but we do have a Facebook group as long as they're allowed to be there, and a MeWe group so people can find them there. But these are critical skills. Now, you yourself, I know you just moved, didn't you? You were in New Hampshire, I believe. What, you moved
Yeah, I was in New Hampshire. Now I'm down in Texas. So you know, got the opportunity. Yeah, I got. Yeah, I mean, I got the opportunity. The very first thing I did when I found out that I was moving to Texas is I called my brother and said, "Hey, do you want a 32-inch Troy-built snowblower? Because I don't need it anymore." So,
where in Texas are you?
I'm out in the Fort Worth area, out in a real rural, area there.
Good.
But as prepared, and Greg, you hit the nail on the head. So as prepared as you think you are, you might be prepared if you were left alone and there was nothing else happening around you.
Bingo.
But and I don't care how badass you look with all of your prepper gear and your AR-15. If 50 people are coming up your driveway, I mean, that's not a situation you want to be in to begin with.
Oh, well, I try not to use language that this platform might not appreciate. So I tell people,
yes,
I tell people that even if you're the best in the West with a straw and spit wads,
yeah,
you can only be best so long. Some days you
even
have an off day, you got to sleep, and you may just be outnumbered.
And even if it's not the people, Greg, you raised another really interesting thing. So we have 99 active nuclear power plants in the US, plus I don't even know how many spent fuel pools on the ones that have been decommissioned. But if you want to talk about dozens and dozens of Chernobyls going on after a grid down event, again, as prepared as you are, that's not a situation you want to be in. Just because you've got some iodine tablets doesn't mean you're going to survive, dozens of Fukushimas or, Chernobyls going on in this country.
That's right. That's right. So there's quite a few, and I covered that in a previous video. I just did a video talking about this. There's enough material to be, something equivalent, something, on the order of, 90 to 100 or even more times more radioactive material than all our warheads, just from these plants. It depends on how you weigh it and rack it and stack it. But there is a lot of radiological material in these spent fuel pools, just the United States alone, not to mention other countries. And ours are probably the most unsecure, at least in France. They've been burying that stuff. So if anybody wants to see that, need to go back and see my previous video on that topic. But
yeah,
I did a video. I did a bug out video for nuclear bug out. So they're just things that people need to be aware of. You're in a pretty good location there in Texas. I've just bought 40 acres in Arizona myself. So I'll be going back and forth. Maybe I might drop by and see you sometime.
Absolutely.
I got a daughter down in Houston area. Now you had yourself a basement aquaponics system when you were in New Hampshire. Are you doing something like that now?
I will be. I actually sold the aquaponics system with the house. It ended up being a selling point for the house, having this big aquaponics farm basically in the basement. So it's still up. It's still up and running. But I have presently I have a pecan orchard, so that's I've been focusing on that. But I do fully intend to at some point put my aquaponics back up, because that was number one. It's great. It's relaxing. It's a lot of fun. But number two, it gives food security for you and your family. So aquaponics is definitely something that if you're looking for something, to give your family food security, something to, teach your kids about, the kind of cycle of nature, how nature works. There's just no downside to doing aquaponics. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Well, I've got aquaponics videos on this channel. I've got channels about growing microgreens in your living room. I mean, you can live in a city and grow your own food. I mean,
sure.
Mike did it in his basement. I've done it in my living room. And I got aquaponics out of here in my driveway. You can do it in your driveway, or I got a greenhouse.
Yep.
Many ways to do it. I just don't have enough time to do it all myself. Running
Yeah.
YouTube channels and a big daytime job and everything else I'm doing. I'm looking for people to kind of sharecrop with me here. But food security is going to be one of the most critical things in this kind of occasion. So do check out my videos. I show you how to grow a garden, how to grow it, raise beds, even without having to go. Won't be able to go to the store and get stuff. So you got to know how to do things. That's why I promote worm farming. That's why I went into worm farming. I knew this stuff years ago, and I thought these are the things I need to go into. And so check that out. And also, you can get seeds. You can support my channel and yourself by going to my links to True Leaf Market below and my show notes and my pin notes, because they've got a wide range of seeds, including microgreens and lettuce that you can grow and other things in your aquaponic systems and things you can plant out in the field in any garden that you might have. Seeds are going to be very valuable in a grid down situation. You better get them while you can before things go. And this is the time to be buying seed anyway right now. So check out that.
Oh, it is.
But
Yep.
So what we've done here, we taught everybody what the threat is. We've told everybody about how it's in flux. We've told everybody that you can be influential. We as the they, it's up to us to apply the pressure. You've got your site links. You've got a great website. I'll put the links in the show notes to things, including your website. So any closing notes you'd like to say before we wrap
Yeah,
up?
I would. Yeah, I absolutely. If you are concerned about this, what Greg talks about all the time and what we're talking about today, take action. We don't have to be victims here. The government, for decades has not done what it's supposed to do, what we elected them to do. The first role of the federal government is to protect the people, and they have failed. So we need to take action, and we need to hold them accountable to do what we sent them to do.
Amen. Amen. And share this video, because the content herein is what people need to know about. All my videos on power grid defense and even how to grow your own food, find them and share them widely with your friends, because these are things that people need to know. They need to become aware of these things. This is how we're going to save our country and survive if it does go down. These are things everybody needs to have a full cognizance of. So please share this stuff as widely as you can. Anything else, Mike?
Nope. I really appreciate the opportunity, Greg. It's always great to talk to your listeners.
Mike, I really appreciate it. You're a hero. You're one of my heroes. I have just a lot of gratitude for you and what you do. A lot of appreciation for the spirit that you got within you. You are, if we had, just a few more people like you, we can make a big difference. But we've got a lot of people in this audience, and I'm sure a lot of these people can stand up and at least make some phone calls or send some email, and that will make a big difference. So
sure will.
Let's get engaged, folks. Let's do this. Let's get this thing fixed. You may be a prepper, and you may want to, and I am, and we may, if it hits, we want to survive. But hey, we need to make our odds as good as we can. Let's make sure the grid don't go down. And there's a lot of other things that we can do, but let's not let this be one of the things that falls on our head. Let's get this fixed.
Absolutely.
Mike, I'm going to say thank you for being on the show today. I hope to have you back again before too long. You're doing so much. You're so active. We could almost do this weekly probably, but I don't know if we can find the time to do it, but I really appreciate everything you're doing. Thank you, Mike. And with that,
no problem. It's great seeing you again.
I'm going to say to everyone here, thank you for watching.